Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Q&A, so we're going to go ahead and get this started. But guys, I want to remind you guys some of these deeper, more intrinsic political questions that might be related to things that can lead to revolutions, military coups, things like that, as well as firearm direct questions. I have a completely different channel to where I cover stuff like that. For my non-American audience, which comprises like 50% of my audience here, people who are only here for fitness, that stuff's going to get boring pretty quickly. They don't really count as off topic when I have another channel dedicated completely to those topics that you guys could go to. So you might want to go ask those things there rather than throw them in the Q&As. All right, well, let's go ahead and get this started. First question. Would you recommend pendlay rows over regular rows for general strength and performance, following the same arguments you make for push press versus regular press? Hands down, I will always recommend the pendlay row for any athlete who needs speed and power. If you need explosive power for your sport, it doesn't matter whether you're an MMA fighter, whether you're a football player, whether you are some sort of strength athlete. If you need power as one of your most important performance components, I don't see any reason whatsoever to do normal bent over rows instead of pendlay rows. A pendlay row is going to be a better explosive movement. It is going to be better for you overall. And so, yeah, I'm going to push them in direction of pendlay rows. Guys who maybe don't care as much about explosive, who are seeking just true hypertrophy as their primary and maybe even only goal, I might push them more in the direction of doing bent over rows. Although you could get the same amount of growth with pendlays, you'll have to do probably a slightly different type of training. It might require more total sets, more total work, and so maybe for some of those people I'd push them in the direction of the regular barbell row. But for speed and power, anyone who needs those things, it would be, in my opinion, again, this is just my opinion, it would be silly for them to do normal barbell rows instead of pendlay rows. And even if people are like, well, they just need to bring up their back development, so maybe that's why they do them. Yeah, but weighted chin-ups or weighted pull-ups could do that just as easily and provide other benefits for someone who is actually an athlete. So for anything you would use a normal barbell row for a regular athlete, I would probably push them in the direction of weighted chin-ups, weighted pull-ups, because they have other performance elements also, such as stabilizers and things that they build up. They strengthen your core more. So I push them in that direction instead of going to the barbell row for general hypertrophy for the back. All right, next question. Do you feel that people who have experienced such harsh body and eating disorders still have the same weight and muscle mass potential as those who have never had such disorders? Or have we impaired that in any way through being severely underweight and nutrient deficient for an extended period of time during our youth, where our bodies are still developing, 15 to 18 years old in my case? All right, I don't want to discourage people at all, but the answer is yes, you will probably have impaired it to some extent, but I want you to understand that that doesn't mean you shouldn't train, you shouldn't set goals, things like that, because there are massive fitness and health benefits to be gained from training. And I think particularly anyone who has struggled with certain types of disorders in general, the training itself can be therapeutic as long as you don't become obsessive in certain aspects of it. And that is something you need to be aware of if you have suffered from a major eating disorder, is that don't let your training itself push you back towards disordered thinking. Use it as something therapeutic. Now, as far as the limited potential, yeah, absolutely. Some of your hormones and things can be permanently impacted for life, particularly your sex hormones, due to starving yourself during your formative years, during your high school years. And a lot of guys need to realize that. And that's one of the reasons I recommend young men not get ripped, not get peeled to extremely low body fats in that age range, because they have the potential to severely limit the growth of their sex organs and their hormone production coming up into the future. And it applies to females too. I had a female I knew, I've told this story before, one of my exes, her sister, she actually had been a high school wrestler, and she did a lot of stuff to make weight. She was bulimic in order to make weight, and she would get down really, really low, like well under 20 pounds under the normal range for her height, to make weight for wrestling in high school. And she suffered even 4 years after graduating high school. She still continued to suffer problems with the development of her female reproductive system. She had a lot of problems as a result of that, and the doctors absolutely attributed it to her starvation phases through the bulimia and the eating disorders for her to make weight for wrestling. So these things do happen. And the same thing with your height. You can also limit your height because you're gaining that last couple inches of height during those years, and by starving yourself and having eating disorders, you can limit the total height that you're going to reach, which will of course limit overall development, stunted bone growth, stunted height. So yeah, there are absolutely limits, and it can affect you for the rest of your life hormonally and developmentally, unfortunately. All right, next question. I'm on a lower upper split Tuesday and Wednesday, Friday and Saturday linear progression routine. I've made myself with powerlifting principles in mind. Would it be wise to include leg press or hamstring curl after heavy squats and deadlifts, as 85% to 90% promotes more strength than hypertrophy? P.s. I'm 20 years old and your YouTube content has really opened my eyes up to the fitness world. I'm going to say you don't want to do this, and here's the reason. And you're going to find a lot of top experts in the field of kinesiology and exercise science are going to tell you this exact same thing. So this isn't just my opinion. I've seen full write-ups by people like Dr. Mike Israetel on this that are several pages long explaining the problems with this. So again, this is not just my opinion. This is the opinion of some extremely credible experts, professors, and researchers. You shouldn't be mixing rep ranges on the same day for the most part, particularly for big body parts like your legs. You will get less gains as a result of this. If you want to add in higher rep stuff, because again, it seems to be that you're talking about rep ranges, like adding high rep leg presses and leg curls, you should probably be very careful about incorporating too much of this on the same days when you do your max effort work. Because when you start hitting things like 90%, that is actually max effort work for gym lifts and things. And so by incorporating too much extra volume behind it, you can interfere with the training signal and the recovery pattern. So you need to either put this stuff into phases or you need to run them on different days. So you should probably start undulating your training if you really feel the need for this to actually work at 90% and do high rep work for your legs during the same phases. You probably need to go to some sort of concurrent or undulating periodization so that you can separate them out in days and have days to where you do purely your heavy work and then days where you do your volume. And that's how things like the conjugate method ended up being developed, where they have either hypertrophy or speed days and then you can do all your volume behind that. Whereas in your max effort days, you need to really limit the rep ranges you do. I wouldn't, for even accessory type work on your 85 to 90% days, particularly 90% days, I wouldn't go over about 4 or 5 reps on anything. And that's just to make sure that you keep everything balanced in your routine and you're not interfering with different recovery patterns and energy systems that are going to limit your total progress that's going to affect you 6 months or a year down the road. All right, next question. How do you feel about the current state of American football with the recent discovery of CTE? It now seems there's a widespread concern of accumulative concussions. Football is like a gladiator sport in my opinion, but man, there is nothing like it. Is it still king in Texas? Yeah, American football is still king in Texas. It is by far the most popular sport down here, and there are entire small towns here that are so obsessed with it that it's a massive part of their culture. That really is true down in Texas. It's a big deal to us. Football, barbecue, guns, those are intrinsic parts of Texas culture for the most part. But as far as your concerns with the cumulative concussion, yeah, it is a real concern. And should it be a concern? Absolutely. Is it something that needs to be taken into account when young men decide to go into the sport? Absolutely. But, in our culture, we glorify sports so much that I think a lot of these young men aren't going to really assess those sort of risks, because the potential glory, the potential payout is so high that most of them are going to see it as being worth it. And is it? Maybe so. I can't say. That's for each individual person to say. I would say that what we really need to focus on at this point is maybe training around it to improve vertebrae stability, making sure that these guys develop strong enough traps and upper backs to support all of their vertebrae and everything, particularly up through the neck. And I think that we need to maybe, since we have so much money involved in football, this isn't even a maybe, let's develop better helmets. Some of these team owners and people involved in it could spend a few $1 million. This is a $1 billion plus sport. So they could spend a few $1 million researching better helmet technology to help with the concussion. So, we have come so far with various materials and technological innovations that I can't believe that we can't spend a little bit of R&D money to develop better helmets to reduce those concussion rates in this sport, considering how much money there is involved in it. And I think that's the way to go forward. Let's go ahead and use the technology to our advantage to help these athletes out who entertain so many millions of people and who are involved in such a massive sport that's such a big part of our culture. Technology is your answer there, in my opinion. All right, next question. Hi Jason, why do you use such a narrow grip in your bench press and similar exercises? I do that too because wide grip hurts my shoulder joints and I lift so goddamn much weight regardless. But for you as a powerlifter and all, that just seems dumb as narrowing the grip easily takes off 5 to 10 kilograms from your bench or even more. So why the narrow grip? The narrow grip is for exactly what you described: less shoulder pain, less damage to the shoulder joint over time. And what I would remind you is, I'm not a power lifter anymore. Let me make that clear. I consider a power lifter to be someone who competes in powerlifting, just like a bodybuilder is someone who competes in bodybuilding. I have no future plans to step on the platform again. I have not competed in going on close to 2 years now. This summer, at the end of this summer, will be the 2-year anniversary of my last powerlifting meet, which I took a medal at as an international event, got invited to Worlds for the WPC. I'm done. So I lift for fitness, I lift for health, I lift for general strength. I have some other endeavors I want to jump into later, but I'm not a power lifter because I don't compete in it. I mean, you go 2 years without stepping on a platform or competing and don't plan on competing again, you're not really part of that anymore. That's just the way it is. But even for powerlifting purposes, you're going to develop more strength with a narrower grip than you are a wide grip because you're having to move the weight a longer range of motion. You're having to develop some of the weaker points of the lift. The longer range of motion there means both the top and the bottom get worked a lot more. So particularly that bottom, because the narrower grip forces you to go a little deeper. That deeper at the bottom is going to give you more power out of the bottom once you transition to a wider grip for the competitive environment. So you could train closed grip bench press year round. Yeah, it's going to be 10 kilos less on the bar potentially, but you're not putting the same stress on your shoulders. You're developing a more well-rounded strength base, and you're developing more potential explosiveness out of the bottom, so that when you do go to a wider grip, if you even choose to compete, because I would argue that sometimes 10 less kilos on the bar is still sometimes gets you the exact same place in a meet, gets you the exact same medal, the exact same invite to the international or world event sometimes. Sometimes the gaps are much beyond 10 kilos difference on people's totals from first, second, and third place. They usually are in powerlifting. So that being said, they're not that tight a competition. If you can save your shoulder joints going through the narrower grip, then by all means do so. Now, if you think that you are going to be in a really tight category, because usually when you go to a big meet, you know who you're competing against. You know what their records are. Everyone goes and researches this. They know who their competition is for their class. It's not a big mystery. So you can determine that ahead of time and decide, okay, 5 weeks out, 6 weeks out, am I going to widen my grip up and see if I can squeeze that extra 10 kilos out? And then you have the option of doing that if you so choose. But it is an option. But as far as people who aren't going to compete in powerlifting, I have no use for the wide grip bench press. I think you get more overall strength and more overall upper body development by doing a narrower grip, and it's a lot safer. Lower injuries equal more gains and more strength over the years. So that's just my opinion on it. All right, next question. Howdy Jason, you must be a fellow Texan. I'm running the cutting version of your 5x5 training Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I train Monday and Wednesday nights. However, due to my schedule, I can only train Friday morning. Is 40 hours between the Wednesday and Friday workout enough recovery time, or should I train on Saturday? Cheers. Keep up the informative content. I think in this case, it could impede recovery a little bit, but you know what? You also don't want to get caught up in paralysis by analysis. You're 2 days apart. Is it exactly 48 hours? No, but it's generally 2 days, and then you've got extra recovery time after. So is it going to be okay? Probably. Now, there might be a small chance that your Friday workouts, you're going to hit walls easier because you have 40 hours instead of 48 or more in between, and this is a very aggressive program. You might run into some recovery abilities, but I programmed for this sort of thing into the program. When I wrote the resets the way that I did, and that's one of the things people don't realize. They're like, oh, you just copied various old 5x5s. No, I actually changed some progression stuff. I put a lot of thought into this. I actually sat down and scribbled this stuff down and looked at different aspects of it for hours and hours before I put the final program out. And one of the things I did was requiring you to fail twice. And that will actually account for the problems that you could run into with your particular situation. The time frame you're having to train on, you also have 80 hours before your Monday workout again, instead of just 72. You have a tremendous amount of recovery time over the weekend with your schedule. So if on Friday you hit a bunch of misses because you're slightly under recovered, When Monday rolls around, you've now pushed yourself to the limit, but you've had 80 hours to recover, to grow, to adapt. And so when that happens, you're probably going to find that you're going to be stronger come Monday due to the extra recovery. So any misses that you hit on Friday, you're probably not going to hit them again on Monday. Your strength is going to be good. So what you're going to find is that the program is going to continue as usual on the progression as a result of that. So even though you might run into Friday problems, it's going to be balanced out by the longer time. And that's one of the reasons that I do 2 resets or 2 misses allowed before resets instead of a single one. And that is because some people are going to have bad days. They're going to have a day to where they're not recovered from anything due to bad timing, like in your case, or to a problem with their sleep pattern, illness, things like that. Everyone's going to have bad days, and you don't want a single bad day to interfere with the recovery and adaptation of the full program or to stop your progress as a result of it. So that's one of the fail safes I have written into the progression, is to accommodate that already, because these things do happen, they do come up, and I wanted the program to be flexible enough to deal with that. And I think you'll find the flexibility that I wrote into the progression pattern will accommodate for your problem. So just run it the way you're doing it. It should be fine. All right, next question. Debate question. Do you think that after a while, natty lifting for the purpose of building muscle is simply stupid and something close to insanity? You do the same thing year after year only to gain very minimal return on it, if not at all. Do you think that after a certain threshold, everyone interested in gaining muscle should take muscle building elixirs? All right, brother, there is absolutely some truth to what you're saying. At a certain threshold, you are right. Thinking that you're going to gain more muscle or any appreciable amount, probably beyond the first 3 years for a natty lifter is non-existent. So these people who say, well, this person's been training for 10 or 15 years natural, and it's like, so what? So they gained 3 pounds of muscle over the last 10 years of their training, or 2 pounds of muscle. That's not enough to notice in the mirror. But we could argue by that same token that if they stop training for size, then they will start to regress a little bit. They might lose a little bit of what they have. So if their goal really is to hold on to muscle mass, they might need to continue to training for it anyways. But the idea that you're going to continue to gain muscle year after year after year drug-free, you can. It is true that you can, but is it going to be a noticeable amount? Probably not. If you gain after about the 3-year mark, if you gain any significant amount of muscle in a year or a 2-year time period after that, odds are your training was really terrible for the first 3 years, because if you're training efficiently, you're going to gain probably 95% or more of the total muscle mass you're going to gain for the rest of your life training in that first 3 years. You will gain almost all of it. You're going to be down to mere ounces of muscle gain per year very, very quickly. But if you're able to gain more than that, then odds are maybe you did maximize your training in the first few years. And so therefore you might still have wiggle room. If you trained with bro splits and 15 sets of body parts, doing an arm day and a chest day and a leg day, yeah, you might continue to gain because you ran a really slow and efficient program for drug-free lifters, and so therefore you have more gains left in the tank. But had you run something more efficient, yeah, you might be nearly maxed out. So it also matters of how far did you go. Now at a certain point though, anyone who's been training for size beyond that, say they hit that 5 or 6 year mark, they're pretty well done though. So yeah, if they want to gain further muscle beyond that and they really think they are, that's going to be delusion, but that is a delusion fueled by the industry and propaganda and bullshit that people have been given. So you can't always blame people for having a delusion if it's been fed to them externally and reinforced externally. So the answer to them is going to be they need to get in touch with reality a little more, or they need to decide are their goals so important to them that they need those natural elixirs, because odds are they probably will, but they also need to assess if that goal is that important to them, and is it something that they're obsessing about for the wrong reason. Maybe it's a body image disorder, in which case they might want to talk to a therapist before they jump on any muscle building elixirs. But that's just my opinion. So all right, next question. Can muscle fiber type change through exercise? I ask as I am a sprinter and would like to know if I was able to introduce more steady state work. Is there a possibility that some of my fast twitch fibers can be converted to slow twitch fibers, in turn making me slower? All right, complicated topic. Yes, fiber types can shift through different intermediate types. Are you going to turn a true fast twitch fiber into a slow twitch fiber? Absolutely not. If you are doing enough cardio to interfere with your recovery, though, like your lower intensity to interfere with your high intensity training, you might get a little slower. But I did a whole video on this the other day. If you go check it out, it was about developing speed and power while doing large amounts of list cardio. And I think I did it within the last week, so you should be able to find it pretty easy. I go into a lot of detail on that. So you just have to program around it, because you should be doing some list cardio even as a sprinter, just for your overall health, overall balance, your recovery, all of that. It is important for you to do some. But as far as the shifting the fiber types, yeah, it absolutely happens. But the easiest way to deal with that is just make sure that you're incorporating enough explosive work so that your most explosive fast twitch fibers don't shift too far down the spectrum the other direction. But what you need to remember there is probably not going to make a difference on your sprint speed if a few of them do, simply because they are still ultimately fast twitch fibers. And you need to remember your endurance fibers do contribute to your sprinting power. They just don't contribute as much, and they don't get fatigued as fast. That's why you have that wide spectrum of intermediate fibers there. So it's probably not going to affect you unless it interferes with your recovery due to not adapting to the new volume or doing too much too soon. And again, I did a whole video on that if you want to go check it out. All right, next question. Jason, how do CrossFit athletes attain aesthetic physiques and look better than most bodybuilders, yet they don't necessarily train in the typical bodybuilding hypertrophy manner or train to look aesthetic? Honestly, this can come down to two different factors. Number one, genetics. Most of your aesthetics and how aesthetic you look at a certain amount of muscle and body fat is largely genetic. You can't change that. So people who are genetically predisposed to look more aesthetic due to, again, just muscle insertions, bellies, things like the width of their shoulders, their collarbone versus their pelvis, things like that. Those are all genetic traits. So that's going to affect that to a large degree. Number two, the big deal is because most bodybuilders don't actually know how to train for their goal, meaning they follow these certain types of split routines and bro splits and things that were popularized by magazines that really only work ideally for people on very massive amounts of drugs, people on big drug cocktails, pro bodybuilders. They're not going to be as efficient as a lot of other styles of training that people think of as not geared towards purely hypertrophy but more strength oriented. They're actually not going to be as efficient as even those for gaining muscle mass. So it ends up happening, people are running routines that actually just don't put as much size on them, whereas in a lot of athletic style training is going to put size on you. People who are doing high volumes of explosive work and who are doing GPP work are getting all the elements necessary for large amounts of hypertrophy. If you think about it, all right, they're doing all this explosive training, which is hitting all of their upper threshold fibers. It's building their work capacity because they are stronger. They can also handle heavier weights for their higher rep stuff or for their conditioning type stuff. So you combine that with these people doing the large amounts of GPP work. And let me ask you a simple question. Do you honestly think doing 30 minutes or an hour of GPP work several times a week isn't going to induce metabolic fatigue in your muscles? Of course it is. It's strength-oriented volume training. Even though it has an athletic component to it, strength-oriented volume training will put massive amounts of hypertrophy on you. So if you've built a big strength base doing heavy push presses, deadlifts, front squats, things like that, you've got power, and that power is going to translate into work capacity that's going to carry over to all your GPP work. And so if you have that power base built and you're now doing metabolic fatigue with a bunch of barbell complexes, farmer's walks, sled drags, swinging hammers against tires, don't you think that stuff, all that GPP work, is going to create a large amounts of metabolic fatigue? And hasn't it been proven that metabolic fatigue induces large amounts of hypertrophy? Of course, both of those are provable statements. They're both true. So that being said, why wouldn't these people gain large amounts of muscle mass? And in fact, since they're doing it at a higher frequency than a lot of the traditional bodybuilding training, they're going to grow even faster than people who are doing body part splits by doing this. So why wouldn't they be bigger than the bodybuilders who are doing really shitty inferior style training? You got to think about it from that perspective. It's just that that's just how bad body part splits are for people who aren't running a pretty hefty dose of drugs. And so anything that actually keeps metabolic fatigue and muscle fibers stimulated, the upper threshold fibers at a higher frequency, is going to produce more muscle growth. It's just unavoidable. All right, next question. Stan Efferding claims increasing sodium intake will aid in gym and athletic performance. Is this true? Yeah, of course it's true. Up to a certain threshold, at least. It's people who try to run really low sodium diets who are trying to train a lot who run into problems. And they're doing it because they're concerned about water retention and they don't want to bloat from the extra sodium, but they're not factoring in that a lot of that water that you're gaining from sodium is going to be intramuscular. Intramuscular water is going to produce better leverages in the gym. You are going to be stronger, particularly on your big lifts due to those leverages in the intramuscular water. So yeah, does sodium increase performance in the gym? Absolutely. If you're concerned with maximum performance, should you be following a low sodium diet? No, you shouldn't. It's going to impede your performance. It's as simple as that. So when you look at it from that perspective, yeah, Stan is dead right. It helps hydrate the muscles as long as you're getting sufficient potassium with it. Now, too much sodium with not enough potassium is going to impede performance. But if you're getting pretty hefty amounts of both and they're in balance, yeah, it's going to make you stronger in the gym, just due to intramuscular hydration. All right, next question. What's your opinion on Tony's sentiment at Real World Tactical, and how could someone get that level of athletic ability? I don't really know about the guy. I went to look and see a little bit about who he is and just get a very brief idea of what he's about due to this question, because it seemed like an interesting question and this sounds like someone I might be interested in. And I like the general concept. Again, I don't know all his principles, but I see a guy doing a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of GPP work for the purposes of tactical training, who teaches urban tactical courses for firearms. And yeah, I tend to agree with this philosophy, and anyone who really knows about firearms and firearm tactics in any sort of urban or even rural environment knows that your strength and conditioning is going to affect your ability to handle weapons quickly, to sustain fire, to work on the move. It's all going to affect your tactical ability with firearms. And people who say silly shit like, oh, it's so easy, just pick up a firearm and kill someone, and that's the problem with them. These are people who really don't know anything about firearms when they say really stupid shit like that, because the truth is, oftentimes when you're dealing with firearms in places where you can legally have them, you're dealing with attackers who are armed themselves. And yeah, conditioning absolutely matters. Conditioning and strength matter, because the strength of your shoulders and everything is going to affect how fast you can swing a weapon up to fire. It's going to affect how well you're able to maintain a position with that weapon while advancing, while shooting, before your shoulders and things start to get fatigued. Your conditioning and power and speed are going to affect how fast you can run with a weapon while keeping your heart rate consistent when you slow back down, and keeping a low resting heart rate, because any shooter will tell you that your heart rate, your ability to control your heart rate and control your breathing, will affect accuracy massively. That's the reason so many competitive shooters use beta blockers in competition, even though they're banned in a lot of competitions. That's why they use them. They block adrenaline. So someone who has much better conditioning is going to be able to handle firearms in a tactical environment much faster, much more accurately, and much more effectively. So I absolutely agree with the general philosophy that I see this guy promoting, that power, speed, and conditioning are essential for effective weapon handling. Absolutely essential if you want to be good at it. So I do like the general philosophy I see here, without really knowing a whole lot about the guy or what he does. Again, I only checked into him for about 5 minutes, but I like the general idea. And how do you get to that level of athleticism? You train. You do explosive power work, strength work, and conditioning work. It's that simple. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.